can.
Recording in progress.
Haha, there it goes. We couldn't figure out how to turn that off just yet, so. All right. Well, happy Sabbath. It's great to be here once again. It's time is flying by. I cannot believe it's already June. June is the 6th month. That means that we're almost halfway through the year. And it's I mean, the weather outside is starting to kind of remind us of that. It's getting a little bit warmer. I think that today's a beautiful day. I mean, last week was a little bit toasty for me. But today it's sun is shining, but it's a little bit nicer weather. It's been just such a nice week actually. I kind of enjoyed it. We here at Woodland, we've been kind of busy the past couple weeks. I mean, you can definitely come and ask us, and we'll tell you all the details. But I'm sure you guys have even seen, right? So 2 weeks ago, we had our retreat, our Leone Meadows retreat, where we were up in the mountains for a little bit, for a weekend there. And then 2 weeks before that, we had a baptism. We welcomed 2 lovely young individuals to our congregation. They devoted their lives to God. It's been such a blessing. And in 2 weeks, we have this new program starting, this awesome program. And just a reminder, right? I don't know if you guys caught that. We are going to be going against them. So this isn't just a kids program. This is a reminder that we too got to read through that book of Mark, or we're going to be, we saw Exhibit A of what will happen earlier today. So we also have to go ahead and read through that book. So we can meet up with them. But I'm just so excited for this summer program, the activities that we've had planned, some of the games that we have planned. It's just going to be a lot of fun. And we're missing some of our kids today, but we know that they're going to be there, and so we're really excited for that. Now, over the past about 2 months now, we've been going through the life of David. All right, so we looked at 2 stories of life. We saw David as what? The first one, we looked at David as a shepherd, all right? And we learned about how he learned about God through that experience. And then we took it in the second message, we took a look at David as a warrior. All right, someone's on top of their game. Everyone else, you got to step up. All right, and so we looked at the second stage of his life there, and we spent some time looking at a particular instance of David deciding not to kill Saul when he was right in the palm of his hands, and instead following his conscience, following God's will, and sparing his life. And we saw how sometimes God gives us a calling on our heart, but we have to follow him in leading us to that calling. We can't take the shortcuts, and we have to devote our lives to God and let him lead us to where he wants us to be and how he wants us to get there. And now finally, we've made it to David as a king. David as a king, a third installment in the life of David. And the reason why we're looking at the story of David is because the Bible calls him a man after God's own heart. And I don't know about you, but I mean, you're all here today, so I think it's a valid assumption to say everyone here would like to be called men and women after God's own heart. And so we've been looking at this, trying to pull lessons. And honestly, I got to say this, the life of David has so many more lessons than what we've pulled from it. And we could be here for the whole year just talking about David. I think it'd be really fun to someday just take a chapter of the Bible with you all and just go through it and just study it and pull all the different lessons. But we've taken a little step, and we've hit the point where David is now king. And that's where we're going to pick up in his life. But before we begin, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer with me, if you will. Father in heaven, we're so happy to be in your house this morning. We're so happy that you invite us into your house. You invite us into this fellowship, this communion with you. Even though you're the most powerful God, you are the only God of the universe, the creator, the redeemer, you still desire to associate, to fellowship, to intertwine yourself with us, even so far that you sent your son to die for us. And Lord, as we're looking at the life of David, this last chapter of his life, Lord, we pray that we will have eyes open that can see what you're telling us, that we'll have ears that are ready to listen for your voice, and hearts that are soft, malleable, and ready for you to come in. So speak to me, Lord. Speak through me this morning, that we can all learn something, that we can all grow closer to you, that we can all have a desire to live with you all the days of our lives. This is our prayer this morning. In your name I pray, amen. All right, so Saul is dead. He has died at war, and that means what for David? He's ready to be king. Now, he does become king, but it's a little bit of a complicated process. We're not going to spend too much time with it right now. But the gist of it is Saul's son gets some of the military commanders, put him as king over Israel, and David as king over Judah. But after the dust settles, after a couple years pass, David is now king. It's the moment that he has been waiting for. Right? We've been looking kind of towards this moment, this part of his life in these previous chapters. Right? We talked about how he was getting ready for that calling that God was having for him, getting ready and learning about Christ among the sheep. And then we learned, how he didn't rush to grab it when he could have. He was patient. This all was shaping him for this moment, and here we now are. Can you imagine that experience of going from sheep, from the wilderness, from caves, to going to a palace? That's quite the transformation. Before we take a look at this, I have a question for you guys. What was the nicest building or say residential place that you guys have ever been to? Anyone want to share the most beautiful residence that you've ever been, or a building that you've ever been to? Anyone here been to the White House? No. Anything? Maybe your mom's? Yes, Linda. Ooh, a palace in Croatia. Aaron. Wow. That is magnificent. That sounds like a thing. I was going to be like, who do you know? Yes, Nevia. Sure, yeah. Ooh. All right. So there's a house here in Woodland. There's a mansion here. Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's all these nice houses that maybe we've been to. When I was a kid, my parents took the family to this little place along the shore. See if it rings any bells for you guys. It was off the shore of San Simeon. And this little place was on over 127 acres of land. The residence had a total of 42 bedrooms, 61 bathrooms, and 19 sitting rooms. I don't know what those are, but extra rooms. The land that it was on had many acres of gardens, indoor and outdoor swimming pools, tennis courts, a movie theater, an airfield, and at one time it even had a zoo. Who knows what I'm talking about? Hearst Castle. Who's been to Hearst Castle before? All right. See, so you guys have been to some nice places before. I know no one lives there now, but you guys have been to some nice places. So Hearst Castle is this, it's not really a castle. I mean, it's built, it started building, the construction on the place started about 100 years ago. So quite long after the time of the medieval wars where you'd have those castles built. But this estate was built off the coast of the ocean and built by a really rich guy, as you can imagine. And he designed this mansion with all this inspiration from architecture around the world. You know, the pools had Roman, pillars, and there was all these different things, and there was inspiration from Spain and around the world. And William Hearst, the owner, the one who built this castle, was like I said, quite affluent. He was fairly wealthy, and he loved hosting and throwing parties. Right? When you're wealthy, when you have a big house like that, that's what you do. Right? So he would invite all the big people of that time to come over to his house. And they would stay, and it wasn't like come over for a night. No, they had their own room, right? Those 40-something rooms, right? Needed people to sleep in them. So these people would spend quite a while. In fact, there's a funny story where they say, you knew that it was getting time for you to go based on how far you were sitting from Mr. William Hearst at the dinner table, wherever your placement. So as it got further away, you're like, okay, now it's time for me to go home. and with his airfield that he had over there, little airstrip, he would fly people, right? Because San Simeon is kind of far from LA and Hollywood, and so all these big people would fly. You know, he would fly them, and every morning he would get his newspaper flown in. All right, that's quite a way to receive your paper. But he was wealthy, and he threw these parties, and people wanted to be there. In fact, he had guests that you may have even known, or you probably don't know them personally, but people that you've heard of, like President Calvin Coolidge. He was one of the guests at the Hearst Castle, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Those names ring any bells? Charlie Chaplin. Yeah, it's starting to ring some bells. I mean, maybe for the younger folks, it's a little bit foggy, but you know, if we were living in the 20s, the 1920s, I mean, Hearst Castle was the place to be. But, you know, actually, it's kind of funny because I feel like in today's time, living so extravagantly has kind of, you know, it seems so far out of reach, and we've kind of begun to make it seem so, you know, not so desirable, right? Or like, that's so wasteful and everything. You know, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. We as a civilization have found many other ways to splurge and be wasteful. But for many centuries, it was the dream to have a palace like that, to build so much wealth that you could be almost so reckless with your money. And so you can kind of imagine the situation that David was in. Right, coming from pretty much being broke, right? I mean, I don't really know how, you know, he's living out in the cave. Money probably wasn't the biggest thing for him. But we see some stories of him, you know, protecting others to get an exchange of goods, right? You know, we'll protect your land and hopefully you'll give us something, right? They didn't have money to go into town and buy those things themselves. And so David is now king. He's in his palace. Oh man, the temptations. Right? He could throw those parties. He could put all the gold wherever he wants. He's conquering things. He's a good warrior too. So if he wants something, he can get it. But that's not exactly what happens. Now, in fact, you might be already kind of thinking, okay, David is king. This is where the story gets kind of interesting, right? This is where he starts making some of those slip-ups and not doing things so well. But before all that happens, there's some really just amazing stories in the Bible. And we're going to take a look at one of those. And it's in First Chronicles chapter 13. First Chronicles, that is after Second Kings. All right, so you have a book of Kings and then takes a step back and goes back to First Chronicles. And we're in First Chronicles chapter 13. Now, at this point where we're picking up here in First Chronicles chapter 13, David has, he's been king for a little while now. We talked about how there was a little bit of a time difference between he became king of Judah and then finally king of Israel. And so during this time, he's gone ahead and taken care of all the kind of external forces, the enemies that were coming after him. And so he's been trying to push back on the enemies of Israel, including the Philistines, the Jebusites. He even sets up Jerusalem. David is the one who conquers Jerusalem and sets that as the new capital of Judea. And so he's gone ahead and set things up. And now we see here in 1 Chronicles chapter 13 that David turns his focus inwards, starting with verse 1. And it says, "Then David consulted with the captains of thousands and hundreds and with every leader. And David said to the assembly of Israel, 'If it seems good to you and if it is of the Lord our God, let us send out to our brethren everywhere who are left in all the land of Israel, and with them to the priests and Levites who are in their cities and their common lands, that they may gather together.'" Now, why is he doing this? Verse 3 says, "And let us bring the ark of our God back to us, for we have not inquired it since the days of Saul." All right, so David, he's taking care of all the external pressures. He's put aside all the enemies. He's taking care of business outside. Israel is safe. Now he's like, let's focus inside. And the first thing that pops to his mind is like, you know what? That Ark of the Covenant is in someone's house. The Ark of the Covenant was this, I don't even know what the right term for it is, just something that was so precious to the Israelites. It was the very throne, essentially, of God. If you could claim some item to be that would be what it was. The presence of the Lord dwelt upon it. It was a key point to all the different festivals, and they kind of looked to that as the place to which where God resided. Now, David, right, he's looking inward and he sees that. And he says, you know what? I want to bring that home. And I think it's so cool that David does this because, right, David spends so much of his life where? Out of the city, right? Among the sheep, in the caves. We've been looking at that, right? So David is not a city dweller. At least that's not how he spent much of his life. And when we were at Leone Meadows, many of you guys were sharing your stories about how it's so great to be out there in nature. And one of the reasons why was they felt like God's presence was in the nature. With the trees and the meadow and the little animals and everything that you saw, you felt like you were in the presence of God when you go out there and you're in nature. But now David is outside of that. He's back in town. He's in his palace, and who knows how nice it was, but it was missing something. Out there in nature, it was just, he could see the lessons of God. He could talk to God so freely, and there in the city, he's missing something. And it clicks. He's like, I got to bring his presence here. If I can't really go out there and really be in nature, let me bring him here. Now we all know that God is omnipresent, right? He's everywhere present. He's always with us. We can talk to God wherever we are. We have access to him in all places. But David still wanted to feel present, to know, hey, over there I can see that Ark of the Covenant. That's kind of the holiest of holy places. That's the dwelling place, the very throne kind of God, the Creator, the Redeemer of Israel. David is just so. I love looking at David in this light. He couldn't be without God. He had to bring him home. He said, I want him as my neighbor. I want to know my neighbor. I want him there with me. And so David calls everyone up. He calls all the leaders. He gets everyone riled. He says, let's do this. It's time to bring it home. It's not just a physical thing, but it's also kind of a spiritual thing here too, because what he's doing is he's telling the world around him, right? I'm not the king. I might be the king, like they put me here, but really who's leading, who is going to make the decisions for this nation is God. So he says, let's bring that home. Let's bring it home. And so verse 7, 1 Chronicles 13, verse 7, it says, so they carried the ark of God on a new cart from the house of Abinadab, and Uzzah and Ahio drove the cart. Then David and all Israel played music before God with all their might, with singing on harps, on stringed instruments, on tambourines, on cymbals, and with trumpets. And when they came to Kidon's threshing floor, Uzzah put his hand out to hold the ark, for the oxen had stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and he struck him because he put his hand to the ark. He died there before God. And David became angry because of the Lord's outbreak against Uzzah. Therefore, that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. Now David was afraid of God that day, saying, how can I bring the ark of God to me? So David would not move the ark with him into the city of David, but took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. Oof. This glorious day turned sour. And quite a way for it to go bad, right? It's... David set out with the right intentions, but something happened. And honestly, there's a lesson for us here, right? There's a lesson because it's a little sensitive. We often say, and it's true, that God knows the motives of all that we do. In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 2, it says exactly that God is weighing the motives. And so David is sincere, right? His motives, according to the Bible, appear to be sincere. Right? He wants to bring the presence of God. He wants to bring the Ark of the Covenant, not to just reside in someone's home, but to be at the very capital of the nation. So what happened? Why did this go wrong? God is loving and he's patient. But there are certain things that he has delineated. And just a little example of his love and mercy was that the reason why this Ark of the Covenant was not in Jerusalem, and the whole story behind it was at one point captured by the Philistines. The Israelites had recklessly brought into war. It was captured. And while God does punish the Israelites or the Philistines for what they do, it's interesting because there's no record of them being, smitten, kind of like you saw here, for mishandling it. And they probably didn't really know how to handle it. I would, if you just come across some random object, you're probably just handling it. Maybe they had a little bit of a clue that, hey, this is something important. But we see here that there's no punishment for really how they handled it. Yes, there was some other stuff there, but how they explicitly handled it, kind of how we see here with Uzzah, is not mentioned in the Bible. And what I can take from here, if I may, is that God is showing grace to those who don't know. Right? They were not given the commands on how to handle this precious item, this precious ark. But David and Moses, through Moses, they were told explicitly what they were to do if they needed to move this. They had explicit commands that they were not to put on a cart. They were to carry it on rods, on these poles. They were to carry it. And who was to carry it but sanctified priests, a specific select few group were only allowed to actually carry the Ark of the Covenant. It was not something that was to be treated recklessly. And so while God is loving and he's patient and he's merciful beyond our imagination, there are certain things that he still delineates, that he writes down, that he's written down even for us. And the thing that is hard for us to swallow, that pill that's hard for us to swallow, is that we can have all the right motives, but still do something wrong. And that kind of hurts to say, right? Like, the truth of the matter is, oftentimes we judge people based off their actions, and we judge ourselves based off our intentions, right? And while God does see this full picture, he wanted them to know that it's not just the motives. There's obedience there at play. Now, why would this be important? Who are we dealing with here? We're dealing with the king of Israel, right? The king of Israel, he needs to know how important it is to obey God, right? If God tells him something, it is important for him to follow it. Now, you see, David, and we see this throughout the Bible, we see this throughout the Psalms. David was so in love with God. Can anyone deny that fact? No. To just have that in love. I mean, we have a couple here, a young couple, who's, I think, just celebrating their 1-year anniversary. So you guys may know a little something about love, and we're coming up right behind you. But there's kind of this difference in our age between being in love and loving someone. Have you guys kind of heard those differences before? And I don't know if this is something new. I don't know, like previous generations, if you had that difference, that kind of difference. But, the way I kind of see it is like when you're in love, it's like you want to be around them like 24/7. Right? You're like, I always want to be around this person. I always want to do whatever I can to make them happy, to bring a smile to their face. It's kind of like this, just a very expressive love, kind of romantic, right? You write love songs and poems, and you're just like, oh, I'm so in love, But, and then there's the other side where it's like love, where it's kind of like that underlying, deeper kind of a commitment, right? Where you're like, it's okay, I didn't spend every moment today with them, but you're like, you care about them, and you appreciate them, right? When you love someone, like it's kind of hard to say, right? You don't know if you're like in love with your parents, probably wouldn't say that, but you love your parents, right? You appreciate them, you care for them, and you want to be, you still want to be with them, but you want to like work with them. You want to, it's a different relationship. And David is definitely in love with God, right? He's writing those love notes. He's writing those songs and poems, and he just wants to be around God all the time and just do whatever to make God happy. But even though he had this deep just passion, he still needed to know the importance of obedience. He still needed to know that to lead this nation, all the eyes are going to be on him. And it would be so important to obey God's commands. It's actually kind of interesting because if you take a look at David's, parenting style, it kind of still resembles that. If you go take a look, we don't have time today, but I encourage you to go take a look a little bit at David's parenting style. Look at how he deals with some of his children. He is not a strict dad. He is not. And honestly, it bites him in the rear end. Okay? All of his kids just have problem after problem. And in fact, the Bible tells us that one of them was a really disobedient child, and it says David did nothing to him. David did not rebuke him. And God was hoping that he would learn this lesson. Even though he'd been through so many years of his life, it was still important for him to know that obedience is a vital aspect of our relationships. And it still is, even for us today. And so David gets to this point, and it says he's angry. We don't really know the context in which he's angry. Like, is he angry at God? Is he angry at himself? But it says he's angry. And so he gives up. Have you guys ever been in that position where you start something and it goes really bad and you're just like, I want nothing to do with that anymore? You know, I a little confession here. Bianca and I kind of joke around the fact that I'm kind of like a firework. Where my nature is to go really big and bold, and then when things don't exactly go as planned, or it's a little harder than I thought, I kind of peter out, a little bit. And I'm sure many of you guys have been in similar shoes, right? It's like you start something, you start a hobby, you maybe you're thinking about doing some sort of career change or try something new. And then it just is a little bit harder than you thought, and you kind of drop it off, and you pretend you never even started it. But, and David he has this moment, he's like, oh, okay, I'll step away from it. I killed, pretty much he's probably thinking in his mind, someone died, right? That's a pretty big, consequence. And it's kind of worse when you go through something like that, because it's harder to pick something back up again once you experience that, right? It's easier to start something for the first time than it is to retry something you failed at. Because now not only do you have to go through and put in the extra work to make up for the things that you failed at, but you're also dealing with the psychological aspect of the failure. And so David, takes some time to step away, but he begins to hear something through the pipeline. And that it's this home of Obed-Edom, the one where they placed the ark, is being extremely blessed by God. Now, we don't really know what that means. Maybe he's just having kids, the farm is growing, money's flowing in, who knows? But it's saying that they were blessed. And David hears that, and he's like, right, we should bring that back. He gets a little bit of a reminder there and says, okay, we got to try this again, but this time we're going to do it right. It's already hard to try to do something, and now you got to put in the plans and say, okay, we're going to do it right. And so David goes and says, okay, let's do it right. And so he picks it up again in 1 Chronicles. Actually, we're going to jump. So there's two parts of the story. We're going to jump to 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel, because 2 Samuel also has this story. And 2 Samuel chapter 6, there's a few extra details there that we're going to look at. Okay. So, 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 13. All right, and the pickup to that verse says that David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom. Now look at this. Verse 13 says, and so it was when those bearing the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces that he sacrificed oxen and fatted sheep. So these priests had been sanctified. They'd gone through all the appropriate steps. They were now carrying it instead of just carting it on a cart. They were going through, and he's doing every couple spaces. He's going, and he's just sacrificing, and he is singing. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. and David was wearing a linen ephod. So he's going, and he's not wearing his kingly robes. He ditched that. He's wearing, the priest's robes. He's wearing just a simple garment. And he's dancing, and he's singing, and he's praising God. Now I have a question for you guys. The command that was listed back in Moses' time, we didn't take a look at it, but the main parts there was, this is how you carry, you got to be sanctified, you got to have the right people carrying it, this whole thing. Was there any part there about singing, about dancing, about making it a joyous occasion? No. And in fact, right, if I put myself in David's shoes, right, when I fail at something and I'm picking it back up again, I try to do it like the most subtly way possible. Because if I fail again, now everyone knows, right? Everyone already saw me mess up the first time, so now, like, if I'm going to pick it up, I'm going to do it in my spare time, after everyone's gone to bed, all right, let me try this. And then finally when I get good, when it's going well, then I let everyone know. But David here is not going to do things that way. He's not going to do it just because he has to. He says, fine, this is the way it has to be done. All right, sanctify yourselves. Okay, and carry it in. Right, the way that many of us would do something like that. No, he goes and he's saying, you know what? I'm going to just humble myself. Praise God, we are going to humble ourselves, And so the question is, how do we respond to correction? Right, do we respond to, like David does? Where we are so passionate, be like, all right, cool, you're going to redirect me, cool, we're just going to go for it. Maybe we take a step back like David did, but we go back and we have that same passion, that same energy, that same bold personality, that bold passion that we did things the first time. You see, and David heard that correction. And he said, okay, fine, you know what? I'll do what God is telling me to do. I'll obey God. But I'm not going to just do the minimum. He said, he wasn't going to sacrifice that zeal that he had, that passion, that creativity, right? It kind of takes creativity to go and sing and dance, that romanticism. So he was not going to do it lightly. But not everyone was too happy with that. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 16 says, now as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, that's Jerusalem, Michal, Saul's daughter, his wife, one of his wives, looked through the window and saw King David leaping and whirling before the Lord. And she despised him in her heart. And so they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. Then David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. Now skipping down to verse 20. Then David returned to bless his household. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the maids of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. You could taste the sarcasm there, the sass almost. And David responded to Michal saying, it was before the Lord. I wasn't doing it before all these other people that you're talking about, worrying about their impression and their thoughts. He's saying, I was doing it for the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all his house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore, I will play music before the Lord. Then I will be, and listen to this, and I will be even more undignified than this. So he's saying, you thought that was bad? I'm going to go even worse. I will go and humble myself in my own sights. But as for the maidservants of whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor. Oof, tension. Oh, man. David, his wife was not too happy about that. One of his wives, at the least. But he didn't care. He didn't care what everyone else thought. He didn't care what his wife, which was a princess, right? She was royalty. She grew up in maybe some sort of royal atmosphere. He didn't care. He was bold. And so my question for you guys, are we bold? Are we bold like David in his love for Christ? David wanted it to be known, not that he was a prestigious king. He wanted to be known that he loved Christ, that he loved God the Father. He wanted people to know that God was the ruler of Judah. You know, he didn't wear his priestly robes. He didn't wear his royal robes. So everyone could say, oh, that's the king. He wore the priestly robes. And so he brings the ark to Jerusalem, and he builds a tabernacle for it, a dwelling place, a home for it. This isn't the permanent home, it's a tent, but he still brings it home. David had a love for Jesus. He just wanted to be bold. Even if he made a mistake, he wasn't going to let it get him down. He was just going to go all out. Even if other people had something to say about that. Isn't that kind of an encouraging reminder for ourselves to go and be bold in our love for Jesus? To let the whole world know, it's okay if you are different, because, there's a lot of people out there who are not happy with the way things are in this world, right? They're unhappy with the oppression that's occurring. They're unhappy with the injustice that occurs. They're unhappy with the anxiety that seems to be so prevalent in our society. And if we just blend in, or if we don't even make it evident that we have something that's given us a better life, how will the world know that there is something better out there? And David wanted the whole world to know. His story is down here in history, that he loved Jesus, and that it was that love for Jesus that allowed him to live so freely. David, he makes his mistakes. The life of David is full of, mishaps and things that he should have maybe known better not to do. But it's his deep love for God, that desire to be in his presence all the time, that really sets him down in history. He was so in love. There's no way he was going to cheat on God. There's no way he was going to build idols and fall into idolatry. No, God was his only love. And so even in the midst of this palace that he had, his thoughts were to God. For the married folk out there, or parents with children, you may be you might know this feeling, right? Where you might go somewhere that's beautiful, but it's just not beautiful enough until that person is there with you. Maybe you have a best friend, and it's like you try a food and you're like, oh, it's good, but I got to come here with them. It doesn't hit right until you're with that person who you care so much about. And so David, even if he's finally reached his calling, he's the king. I mean, God put him there. He knows that, but he says, I'm not going to be happy here until my God is here with me. His thoughts went there. Not about how can I make this place a party, a place of reckless abandon. No, he said, you know what? I'm going to turn my eyes to God. You know, William Hearst, the builder, the guy who built that Hearst Castle that we talked about earlier on, his story doesn't end so well. You see, all those parties that he's throwing, all that money that he's just throwing out the door for those flights and everything going on really begins to take its toll. And sometime in the those of you guys who know your history, what is some financial event that happened in the early-ish 1900s? 1929, right? 1930s. There you go. That time we had the Great Depression. And Mr. William Hearst was not excluded from the outcome of that depression. His reckless extravagance had led to him being $120 million in debt. His health began to deteriorate. He had to move back to the East Coast. And his property was essentially gifted to the California state as a national history landmark. You know, his legacy has kind of dissipated. I don't know anyone, or that last name means no significance to me outside of that little building there along the coast. But David's legacy, his reign did not end when he died. The sons of David continued to rule for ever and ever. In look at this. 2 Samuel chapter 7. David is just so in love with God. He wants to build him a house, and God makes him a promise saying this in verse 13 or verse 14. Oh, sorry, it was 13. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. But my mercy shall not depart from him as I took it from Saul, whom I removed before you. And your house and your king shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever. Now, I have a question for you. Is King David still reigning? Is any descendant of his still reigning? Ooh. See? Right. So on earth, no. Right? We can't go. There's no king, a son of David that's reigning here on earth. But God made that promise in Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, continued to reign. Not because he built a magnificent palace or had the strongest army, but because his life was committed to pursuing God. To pursuing God. As David is approaching his death, he gives a little word of advice to his son who would be the next king. 1 Kings chapter 2. I recommend that you highlight this, especially the men. Now, this applies for the women as well, but especially the men in this congregation and those tuning in via Zoom. 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 1 says, "Now the days of David drew near that he should die. And he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man." Prove yourself a woman as well. This applies for you too, ladies. "And keep the charge of the Lord your God." To what? To walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and his testimonies as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn. That is the charge that David gives to his son. That if he continues to pursue God, those testimonies of God, the testimonies of Jesus Christ, to live as the Father does, to have that love, not the reckless abandon of money, but to recklessly, to just throw himself to Jesus, to give himself to God, his ways, his commandments, his testaments. What a powerful reminder for us too these days. You know, David was just a man that was so in love with God. And there's a verse, there's a psalm that I've asked Aaron to read for us. A beautiful psalm that just reminds us, that paints us that picture of just how head over heels in love David was, and how we too can aspire to be so in love.
Should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger. So why should I tremble? When evil people come to devour me, when my enemies and foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though a mighty army surrounds me, my heart will not be afraid. Even if I am attacked, I will remain confident. The one thing I ask of the Lord, the thing I seek most, is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in his temple. For he will conceal me there when troubles come. He will hide me in his sanctuary. He will place me out of reach on a high rock. Then I will hold my head high above my enemies who surround me. At his sanctuary I will offer sacrifices with shouts of joy, singing and praising the Lord with music. Hear me as I pray, O Lord. Be merciful and answer me. My heart has heard you say, "Come and talk with me." And my heart responds, "Lord, I am coming." Do not turn your back on me. Do not reject your servant in anger. You have always been my helper. Don't leave me now. Don't abandon me, O God of my salvation. Even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close. Teach me how to live, O Lord. Lead me along the right path, for my enemies are waiting for me. Do not let me fall into their hands, for they accuse me of things I've never done. With every breath they threaten me with violence. Yet I am confident I will see the Lord's goodness while I am here in the land of the living. Wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord.
Friends, God is calling on your hearts, just like he did to David. Come and talk to me. Come live with me all the days of your life. Friends, who here wants to say that I am coming, Lord? I want to live like David did, to live passionately, boldly, obediently to his commands. This, as we close our closing song for this series, I invite you to think about that charge, and to stand as we sing, "I'd rather have Jesus than silver or gold. I'd rather have him than riches untold." Let us stand as we sing this song together. As I unblink the screen with the words on the screen, I'd like to invite Bianca to come and sing with me. I'd rather have Jesus. Jesus than silver or gold. I'd rather be his than have riches untold. I'd rather have Jesus than houses or lands. I'd rather be led by his nail-pierced hands than to be a king of a vast domain, or be held in sin's dread sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today. I'd rather have Jesus than man's applause. I'd rather be faithful to his dear cause. I'd rather have Jesus than worldwide fame. I'd rather be true to his holy name than to be a king of a vast domain, or be held in sin's dread sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today. He's fairer than lilies of rarest bloom. He's sweeter than honey from out the comb. He's all that my hungering spirit needs. I'd rather have Jesus and let him lead than to be a king of a vast domain, or be held in sin's dread sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today. Father in heaven, we here would rather have you than anything this world has to offer. Lord, I pray that we all here would live passionately for you, to live boldly for you, to live obediently to you, that we can dwell in your house forever, all the days of our lives, that when you come and you call us and say, come, meet with me, our hearts will also say, Lord, I am coming. That is our prayer, Father. In this time of this world of confusion, may we know that we have you, something so much better than this world can offer. We pray this in the name of Jesus, who loves us, who died for us, who is coming back to get us one day. Amen. Y'all may be seated.
Closing announcements for us. Again, Tuesday night Bible studies, 6 p.m. on Zoom. Again, it's on Zoom. You can be making your dinner, eating your dinner, listening to a study. And a reminder about Summer Bible Camp. There are registration forms again on the insides of the pews. If you need more, there's some up here in the front. You can come talk to me. I can give you some. If you want to spread the word and give the registration forms or flyers to friends and family, please also come up and grab them or ask me. And next Sabbath, I believe our speaker will be Sonia Cartwright, who is a friend of ours. That has not been confirmed, I think, but I believe that will be our guest speaker for next week. So happy Sabbath, everyone. And Erin has one more thing.
We see a couple of visitors today. Welcome. It's really great to have you here. If you